Now I invite Ben Savannah to come forward and light our chalice and lead us in our affirmation of covenant, which is in your order of service.
Hello. Perfect. All right. In the words of Reverend Deanna Van Diver, throughout time, our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition has held a thread of clarity. How we relate to each other creates the conditions of hell or heaven here on earth. We find our salvation here on earth, showing up for each other with mercy, respect, and compassion. How are we relating to our neighbors, friends? As a people of faith, we are called to a love that is bold, to love beyond our skill and through our fear with courage and compassion. As a faithful collective, we are called to offer sanctuary, refuge, and comfort to everyone affected by the systems of oppression in this world. As faithful individuals, we are called to relationships of care and accountability. It makes a difference in the quality of this world when people with access to privilege and power give voice to a vision of collective liberation and name the obstacles within and without that limit us. Can we choose to live courageously, a people of faith, a people so bold? Can we faithfully challenge evil in this world and the sins of society that have become internalized within our beings? Our faith does not require that we be unafraid, only that we do not lead with fear or make our decisions from a place of fear. We light this chalice, a symbol of our faith, alive in this world, naming our vision of a collective liberation and daring to remember each other in beloved community.
And now we will say our affirmation of faith, which you'll find written in your order of service. Love is the doctrine of this church. The quest for truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge in freedom, to serve humankind in fellowship, to the end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant with one another.
First Unitarian Universalist Church in New Orleans has long been involved in various kinds of work towards racial healing. In a way, it's easier there because although the legacy of slavery and racism in the city is so much more complex, its memorials and lessons are all around and easy to access. New Orleans always had a more complex culture than most other American cities because its colonial history was French and Spanish, which American culture then tried to assimilate. The New Orleans economy was dominated by mercantile capitalism, trade, not manufacturing, and the population was a mix of French and Spanish Creole as well as American colonizers, free people of color as well as enslaved, indigenous people, and a variety of immigrants from Europe and the Caribbean. As a result, anti-racism and anti-oppression studies there are especially nuanced and deep. We regularly send our board members and other interested lay leaders to the People's Institute for Survival and Beyond for their Undoing Racism trainings. And it was there that I had an insight into whiteness and racism's harmful impact on people who identify as white. Before I tell you that personal story, I want to tell you a story from one of the plantations near New Orleans, because it was a story that crystallized for me what that looked like, the harm that racism and the culture of slavery did to white people. Laura Plantation is a museum, a beautifully restored Creole plantation. Creole architecture has a distinct look and tradition. And the story they tell there is the story of the Locoul family who owned it. The plantation is called Laura today in memory of the last Locoul family member to own it, who left a handwritten autobiography. Laura Locoul Gore sold the plantation after getting married and moving with her husband to St. Louis. And the story I want to tell you is the story of why she sold it. When she was a girl in her teens, her grandmother ran the plantation, and Laura and her father lived there. Laura was being groomed to take her grandmother's place. And one day, her grandmother decided to sell a slave over the objections of Laura's father. While he was away on business, she arranged the sale. She sold the enslaved woman, but retained her infant child as part of what she referred to as her crop of slaves. Witnessing her grandmother's unfeeling and cruel treatment of this enslaved family, Laura resolved that she would never become like her. She saw the damage that slavery as an economic regime and racism as a cultural one had done to her white family. It made them cruel and unfeeling. Now, my family, all Midwesterners from Iowa, didn't suffer that kind of damage from racism, but one day at a People's Institute Undoing Racism training, it dawned on me that what had happened to us when we became white as part of the melting pot experience of our mostly German immigrant forebears. They arrived between 1848 and the 1860s, some before the Civil War, some after. As they made their new lives in Iowa, American popular culture was entertaining a restatement of earlier notions of racial hierarchy in terms of scientific breeding, the new science of eugenics. Though eugenicists often lifted up what they called the Nordic race as the apex of human evolution, that really meant of British heritage, and foreigners were still foreigners. And the Irish weren't British any more than were the Mediterranean races, and so people of such ancestry had to become white. It is this process that my family experienced, and maybe yours did too. On a break during that Undoing Racism training, I overheard a conversation among some of the other participants. They were talking about cultures and how we share our cultures, and how often that's done through food. And one of them said something to the effect that white people don't do that as much, and came the reply, well, that's because nobody knows what white people eat. What he meant was being white is a socially constructed identity with no history other than the melting pot experience, an experience of erasure of differences, erasure of culture. There is no white cuisine. There are various ethnic cuisines of those who have become white. French, German, Italian, even Irish pub cuisine. But the nearest thing to a white cuisine might be capitalist, mass-produced processed foods. This sparked a memory. Years before, I had stumbled upon a cookbook titled The Cuisines, plural, of Germany. It organized the recipes into different culinary regions of the German-speaking areas, now or historically, in Europe. And I found recipes that my mother and grandmother made versions of, grouped in the places that I knew my family had come from. Many dishes I had only thought of before as Iowa farm food were in fact German cuisine. The knowledge of this had been erased from us. I'd gotten no hint of that through my family. And then I thought about the time when I was 13 or so. I brought a cassette tape recorder to my grandmother's house and recorded her telling me stories. One of her stories was after my grandfather returned from service in World War I, they were married and became farmers through the Depression and World War II. During World War I, she told me, you couldn't eat sauerkraut anymore. You had to eat Liberty cabbage. And during World War II, out in rural Iowa, where all the phones were party lines, several farms sharing a single phone line, and if your neighbor was on the line, you couldn't call out, but you could pick up and listen in on their conversation. My friends, that was when my family stopped speaking German at home, for fear that a neighbor would report us as spies. So for us, the wars were accelerants. But that result of erasure of our foreign culture was our experience of becoming white. And that loss was the impact on us of becoming white. Nobody knows what white people eat. But we do know that, at least in America, white people speak white English. Being white is being not of color. Whether that means your skin, your speech, your diet, or let's say it, your binary gender, or whatever else passes for normal in an American society shaped by white supremacy culture and toxic capitalism. That repugnant image of the melting pot that has served to pretty up and normalize whiteness is something to consider.
This concludes our service. Thank you for hanging in there with us.
And even if you don't want to stay very long for coffee or water, do go down to Thompson Hall because you can take some goodies home. We had a reception last night. We've got leftovers.
Thank you so much.